AI folks like Perplexity are saying, we are not going to abide by this honor system. We are going to go against the explicit wishes of publishers on the internet. I think that is toxic behavior.
I've always been in awe of and a fan of Wikipedia. This is another early sign of the coming enshittification of the web powered by AI slop.
To coin a term, this is counter-enshittification, right? Like both of these stories, Cloudflare and Wikipedia are saying they're putting up the defenses. AI depends on us, but it doesn't nurture us, and we're going to fight back.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And I'm Chris Saad.
In today's episode of the Startup Podcast, we talk about the titanic battle between Cloudflare and Perplexity, giants of the web and of AI respectively. Wikipedia adopts an anti-AI slot policy. Will they fight back against the enshittification of everything? And finally, is Amazon losing ground to Google, Microsoft, Oracle, Vercel, Cloudflare, and so many others on cloud? Is AWS yesterday's story? Tune in for all that and more right after the break. Today's episode of the Startup Podcast is brought to you by .tech domains. One thing about starting your startup that should be easy but isn't is naming it. Why is it so hard? Because all the good .com domain names are taken. So you end up doing something silly like misspelling it or adding random prefixes or suffixes. No more. Your domain shows your focus and intent, so you should make it sharp, clean, and unmistakably tech with a .tech domain. Head to get.tech/TSP or a registrar like GoDaddy to grab your .tech domain today. That's www.get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was a big fight that's brewing between Cloudflare, who sits in front of 20% of the internet's traffic and does things like content distribution networks, anti-denial of service, caching, many other things, and Perplexity, one of the hottest AI startups. Perplexity is that AI search engine. Now, Cloudflare, who for a number of months now, Chris, have been focusing on the existential danger posed to the web by AI agents, has published a blog post claiming that Perplexity deliberately circumvents blockages on websites that say explicitly, we do not want AI to scrape or crawl our content. Perplexity basically spoofs another browser and goes ahead and does it anyway. And in this article, what Cloudflare actually did was set up a little honeypot trap to actually catch Perplexity crawling content that it wasn't supposed to. Published a blog post. Perplexity have gone back and said, oh, we didn't do it. And anyway, even if we did do it, it would have been fine. And like I said, this is part of Cloudflare and their CEO's, Matthew Prince's, I'd say, crusade. Like they've really taken on a moral mission to stop AI from undermining the basic business model of content on the internet. So, Chris, what do you think of this one?
I think there's two interesting things going on here. Number one, it's difficult to overstate how pervasive Cloudflare is. They run in front of many, if not most, of the most important sites, most of the web.
Yep.
It's a very well-used service, and it is one of the points of failure or the points of concentration on this supposedly distributed internet that we all love and enjoy. And so anything they do is meaningful. And we talked the other day about them turning on this pay me to scrape feature. If they implement it, it matters. It matters a lot. So one might argue they have a stewardship responsibility, good corporate governance, whatever, to contribute to the web and to help out. They also have a, self-serving reason to make this crusade happen, because if people aren't visiting websites and they're relying on agents, then, what's the point of Cloudflare to some degree? I'm sure they have other services, but this is a big part of their business. On the other hand, I think this is instructive to founders, what Perplexity is doing, because I have worked with companies, often those in Europe and Australia, who like to ask permission before doing anything. And they tend to want to stay well clear of gray areas and the law, which might at face value seem like a really good idea. But none of us want to break the law. But actually, in order to disrupt and in order to move fast and break things in a constructive way, in order to win an existential fight, in order to avoid burning opportunity cost, in order to keep up with your competitors. And all of that is especially true in the AI hype cycle or hyper cycle, super cycle. I'm not surprised at or particularly blame Perplexity for their behavior. All of these guys are trying to find content wherever and however they can, and it's existential for them. Yeah, there are some sort of polite society rules about how you respond to error codes and how you don't, set up alternative scrapers and whatever. But they're moving fast and breaking things, and depending on your point of view and depending on the specifics of the law, they may be even breaking the law. And I'm not defending that or justifying it. Strictly speaking, what I am saying is, as a founder trying to achieve that kind of scale and impact, you definitely need to flirt with the gray zones more than I have seen many willing to do. And that's an interesting and instructive observation what they're doing there.
Yeah, look, I'm quite uncomfortable with what you're saying. Not to deny there's an element of truth to it, Chris, but I think this is one of those things where we were talking last week about regulation, and let's talk about how it fits in here, right? When you talk about moving fast and breaking things and sailing close to the wind, I know obviously your experience at Uber is quite central to your story, and I think it is also the best example of doing that when you saw these regulated taxi monopolies that had basically performed regulatory capture. Everyone hated them except for the small number of people who were getting rich off of them. And Uber came in and said, well, yes, technically we're going to be breaking the law, but we think that we're doing something that we are morally comfortable with, that we can sleep well at night, and that ultimately, by showing that we're doing the right thing, we will get those regulations changed. And that is indeed what has happened, right? So that's one example. And I'm sure it was not just at the back of your mind, but maybe at the front of your mind as you were telling a story. And then on the other hand, we talked about crypto last week and about the fact that they were trying to do end runs about regulation. It got a little bit spicy between the two of us because we had different perspectives on whether they were doing that in good faith. Nonetheless, what they were trying to do is say, here are regulations, and this is your argument, Chris, right? Here are regulations that no longer serve the Commonwealth, they no longer serve humanity. And so instead of abiding by them, we're going to sail close to the wind and see if by circumventing those regulations, we will get around them, we will get those regulations changed. Now, what is happening with Perplexity versus Cloudflare is actually quite different because the internet, this maybe comes from a more idealistic time. The internet here was built not on regulation, but on trust. So the way that people stopped Google, for example, the earlier generation of web crawlers from crawling their content is using something called the robots exclusion protocol, which sounds very fancy, but all it meant is you had a little file at the root of your web server called robots.txt.
It does sound fancy, especially since most people just call it robots.txt.
Right, but if you Google it, ironically, it's called the robots exclusion protocol. And it's basically saying, hey, if you're a crawler, you're not allowed to crawl this part of my website, some of it or all of it. And it was an honor system. It was basically any well-behaved browser obeyed the robots.txt. And because of that, there was no need for regulation, right? And this is Matthew Prince's point, the CEO of Cloudflare. There was this honor system, this gentle person's agreement that said, okay, you know what? Like Google gets to crawl our content and in return, we get traffic, right? Google sends us traffic. Now, with AI, that transaction, that deal kind of breaks down a bit because AI crawls the content and doesn't send you traffic. And therefore, there are more people who are inclined to block AI from crawling their content. But the AI folks like Perplexity are saying, we are not going to abide by this honor system. We are going to go against the explicit wishes of publishers on the internet. And, I'm with Matt Prince on this one. I think that is toxic behavior. I don't think it's good for the internet. I think it's bad faith and is exactly the sort of behavior that leads to regulation because you cannot trust people anymore to act as good faith players in this market. And to me, that's really sad.
Yeah, again, I said this before and I'll say it again. I'm not actually speaking necessarily about this particular thing that's happening. It's just that this thing reminded me of the other thing, which is how fast you have to move as a founder and how you have to play in the gray areas. I generally agree with you that the internet has been based on the honor system. The honor system has served us well, and respecting the rights of publishers is generally the right idea. And Google generally had a better contract or exchange with sites than AI. I think that will change. Initially, Google was not perceived to having a good exchange and people wanted to block them too. And I do think the AI story will evolve because people want to be ranked within the LLMs as much as they want to be ranked inside Google. And so I do think the stance on this will evolve. But that doesn't change the fact that these guys are working around the honor system and working, spinning up alternative scrapers. And, at face value, the simple, naive answer is that's bad. Bad. People breaking each other's, honor system, bad. What I'm saying is also, as a founder, you need to look for gray areas or areas where you can push against the world and rewrite some of what is the status quo. What I'm saying, and yes, I am talking about Uber and other startups as well. There are people out there who believe that law equals morality, and that is not true. Law equals our best attempt to roughly approximate the morality we all currently believe in at that moment, but is often corrupted by special interests or by poor writing or by unintended consequences or by simply being out of date.
Or just by the passage of time.
Or by the passage of time. And in some cases, that law, either at the moment it is written because of the real-time corruption or because of the passage of time, is in fact sometimes immoral. It is immoral. It is getting in the way of people's livelihood in some ways, with not protecting anyone and actually hurting people. And in my travels, in my advisory work, in my startup life, I have seen people conflate the two things. Well, if it is the law, then it must be moral. And breaking the law by definition is immoral. And I'm saying there is more subtlety to the story. Obviously, breaking the law is illegal. It doesn't not necessarily, it's not a one-to-one match that it is immoral. It is most often immoral. It is often immoral, but not always.
Yeah.
And I'm saying as the startup podcast, we just want to tease out some of that subtlety that I think founders need to be aware of. And I've given this example before. Taxis had done such a good job of regulatory capture that there was a law that said when you order a limousine, the limousine may not show up within 1 hour of its being ordered. And that was only to defend them against optimizing their operations and any competition who could do it faster than that. So there was literally no moral reason for that law. And so the Uber said, no, fuck you. We're going to send you a limousine as soon as you order it. Now, you can flip taxis on the streets of Paris to fight for those kinds of laws, but those laws were set up by a taxi cartel run by mobs, and it was not helping the society.
Yeah.
And so that's just an example. For the disappearance of all doubt, I'm not saying go around breaking the law willy-nilly. I'm just expressing something that I think some of the audience may not have heard, that there is a delta, however small, between law and morality. And it's just worth observing that.
Yeah, it's a valid observation. But I just feel like I don't reject the observation. I would say it's not a particularly good fit to the situation that we're talking about here, which is
maybe not.
Basically Perplexity non-consensually crawling content. And the
well,
other
it's not a good fit also because I don't think this is the law. These are
that's not the law,
codes
and that's the point. It's like they're taking an honor system. I'm saying the reason laws have to exist is because you cannot expect people to act honorably in society, and so the law is there to capture the people who do not. And the wonderful thing about the internet for a long time, at least in the context of robots.txt, is everyone acted honorably. And isn't it horrible and pathetic that these companies like Perplexity are breaking that social contract such that we probably will need laws? But I think it's equally interesting that what has happened here, and concerning in some ways, is that the response has not been regulation. The response has been someone who has an enormous amount of power in the current structure of the internet, which is Cloudflare, unilaterally taking action, effectively, coming up with their own laws and trying to enforce them, and being able to do so simply because they have the power. Now, I like Cloudflare. Disclosure, I'm a shareholder. I think Matthew Prince is on the right side of history with a lot of things. I think he's on the right side of history with this one. But that doesn't mean that it's good, that the solution to people not being able to be honorable is not regulation. I think the only thing worse than that is to have vigilante corporations using their power to try to stamp their own view of the world on how things actually operate.
He's a prince, that Matthew.
He is.
Yeah, look, I'm gonna keep going down this rabbit hole just for the hell of it. Now we're in the realm of me just being devil's advocate.
Your podcast, bro. You can do what you like.
No, I don't necessarily believe the next things I'm going to say. I'm just continuing to press on the basic and obvious side of this, which is easy to take. There is a question of the greater morality or the greater honorability or the greater good, right? There is the good of the content writer, the website publisher's right to protect their content, right? Remember, their content is not normal property. It can be copied infinitely without any degradation or cost to them. And they have the right, of course, in sort of honorable society to protect the scraping of that content, although the copyright laws are landing it's actually fair use. But the greater good, you might argue, is to create society's next great technology, as powerful as electricity or nuclear power in the form of AI. And for Perplexity to provide a meaningful counterbalance to the Metas and Googles and Apples of the world as a scrappy upstart to try to build their own corpus of content and train their own LLM. And that is a net better for society than respecting sort of the preferences of the robots.txt file. Again, it's not black and white, right? Authors and the web have a right to express themselves and have a right for their content to be protected. Perplexity is clearly being extremely aggressive and not a good steward or a good citizen of the internet. And it's good for Cloudflare to step in and do their part. So that's my general attitude on the thing. But there are higher order goods, and you could argue Perplexity is trying to pursue one of those.
Yeah, although I would argue that it's an incredibly arrogant position to take, to say,
shocking,
we believe that what we're doing is in the greater good, so we will do things without the consent of the people we're doing them to. We're going to steal. We're going to take people's content. And Chris, this is not about copyright, to be clear. This is about access, right? They are taking content from people's web servers when those people have very clearly indicated that they are not welcome. They are trespassing. And to me, I'm like, well, it's one thing to say, well, we're not going to abide by the regulatory capture of medallion operators. And it's another thing to say, you know what, all of those cars parked on the side of the street, that's a waste of resources. We're going to break into them all and just start fucking driving them, because that is what Perplexity are doing, if you wanted to stretch the Uber analogy.
The right analogy for Uber is that there was a lot of cities and a lot of communities that said, we didn't ask for Uber, we didn't invite you into our city, we don't want you around. And Uber was like, no, fuck you. This is good for the city, and we believe in the fullness of time you'll come to understand that. And so they operated anyway. So they were not invited onto the streets, and there were politicians and whatever that were trying to stop it. And in the end, everyone's like, oh shit, our city's actually way better because we can press a button, get a ride. And so again, I'm in the unenviable position here of defending something I don't necessarily agree with. I'm just trying to say that there is. Right now, what frustrates me about other shows, about other media, about most people is that there's this sort of knee-jerk black and white reaction to like, yeah, fight the man, or yeah, that's not good. And it's like, there's subtleties here, guys, subtleties. And I'm not, in this particular case, I think it nets out as probably they're not being good stewards of the internet, and Cloudflare is doing the right thing. They should be doing this no matter what. That's their job, to protect their sites that they operate or that they're vendors for. So there's no doubt everybody is doing their thing. I just want to add more nuance to the obvious take that this is like black and white bad.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And the interesting irony is this is not like the man against the little guy directly. What we've got is the man against the bigger man. Perplexity is, it's got a bubble-like multi-billion-dollar valuation, but it's a pretty small operator in the scheme of things.
That's
Cloudflare
right.
sits in front of 20% of the internet and is valued at about $60 billion. And they are the ones taking on the fight.
Well, Cloudflare would argue that they're protecting the little guy.
I agree with them. I'm just pointing this out. It's not a classic David versus Goliath. It's like Goliath versus an even bigger Goliath who sees it as his job to protect a whole bunch of Davids or something. I've just broke that one pretty badly,
I would say
right?
It's actually the two scrappy little guys trying to scrap and steal from each other, and actually a David is stepping in going, don't worry guys, you've paid me for protection and I'm going to step in and help. Yes, Perplexity has billions of dollars, but it's just it's a very young company with a very with a small team. They're trying to compete with hyperscalers, they're just scrapping and fighting in the mud and trying to do whatever they can. And these guys, Cloudflare, they're paid they're basically paid as a protection racket, right? And not a racket. They're paid to protect sites, and they're stepping in to do their job. And I think everybody's doing their job is actually one way to say this. The publishers are expressing their concerns, as they should. Cloudflare is doing their job, which they get paid to do, and the scrappy startup is trying their best to beg, borrow, and steal to survive and to compete.
I mean, that's fair, right? And, I think this is good for Cloudflare. I have it on good authority that more major publishers are now in negotiations with Cloudflare because of this sort of stuff, because they see the threat to their business model. And by the way, Chris, this is an aside, but I think an important one. You said that, in the early days of Google, not all the publishers really wanted Google to scrape or to index their content. And that's not true. They said that because they wanted Google to give them money. But they were always in this bizarre situation where they were like, Google's taking our content without our permission and they should pay us money. And then Google's like, look, there's robots.txt, just block us. And they're like, no, but we don't want you to block us because then otherwise we won't get all your traffic. So, revealed preference is that publishers understood that the value exchange they had with Google was a good one for them. But with AI, it's different. I think with AI, a lot of publishers are saying, you know what, just don't index my stuff.
Yeah, but this is sort of also my point, Yanev, which is if you were to read the mainstream media and the knee-jerk reactions to that story, it's like, oh my God, Google is stealing content and publishers are asking them to stop. But you know better because you are in Google and you're able to provide that nuance. And what I'm saying is, if you're inside Perplexity or inside these publishers, you probably find the same dynamic as well. The publishers are like, hey, don't scrape me, bro. Well, unless you're going to send me traffic and cite me as an annotation, and you're going to start turning on links to my site, then you can scrape me. There's probably some subtleties going on where they want to be scraped because they want traffic. They're just assuming that the AI is not going to give them traffic until Perplexity and others turn on other. Perplexity actually has a lot of links to third-party sites.
Yeah, but people don't click on them.
And so as Perplexity grows, if it grows, and they realize that it's going to be a source of traffic, they're going to quickly change their robots.txts. And this is going to be a storm in a teacup like it was for Google.
Time will tell, Chris, but it's certainly interesting to watch these big players. I always like a good corporate stoush. And Cloudflare, whether you agree with them or not, whether you think it is the role of a corporation to do this, I've got to admire the kind of public outspokenness of Matthew Prince and the willingness to state a very clear position and go after it. So the next thing we're talking about is Wikipedia adopting an anti-slop policy. Still, I guess, on the general theme, Chris, of countering AI and its negative effects. So one of the problems that Wikipedia has been facing is a massive increase in new pages being created, and many of those pages being created by AI. So Wikipedia, as most of you know, is something that can be edited by anyone. Anyone can add a page to Wikipedia, but then there are editors who have an approval process that basically say, oh, is this web page going to go live or are we going to delete it, and so on. And that is how the quality of the content stays high. And these editors are volunteers, not employees of Wikipedia. One of the problems is Wikipedia has been facing this asymmetric situation of just huge amounts of AI-generated slop coming in, which is very cheap and easy to create. But then they have this fairly heavyweight process of debate and going through, is this meeting our standards? Is this really AI? Are we sure? And they were just being drowned. And so the quote from the Wikipedia employee is, the ability to quickly generate a lot of bogus content is problematic if we don't have a way to delete it just as quickly. And this reminds me of an amazing law called Brandolini's Law, which goes, the amount of energy needed to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude bigger than that needed to produce it. So AI, by the way, just turbocharges Brandolini's Law. That's why you hear about it quite a bit more now, because the ability of generating bullshit, the amount of energy needed to generate it now is probably 2 or 3 orders of magnitude less than that needed to refute it, Chris.
At least.
And so Wikipedia, facing this, is trying to fight back against Brandolini's Law, and they have actually streamlined their process such that if there are a number of different tells that a page is generated by AI, a single moderator can simply delete it. And I think it's just really interesting. It's interesting for Wikipedia and what is the future of Wikipedia, but it's also interesting as a microcosm of this issue of just the massive amount of generation of AI slop. And this is nearly the other side of our previous piece, our previous story, Chris, about Perplexity and Cloudflare, right? Which is that authentic, original, human-generated content is becoming increasingly valuable and scarce relative to the abundance and low costs of AI-generated content. How do we maintain a healthy balance, a healthy ecosystem in this context?
Yeah, well, speaking of the miracle of the decentralized web and the honor system and robots.txt, Wikipedia is one of the miracles that exists within the miracle of the web.
God bless Wikipedia.
I frankly don't even know how Wikipedia works, in the sense that I don't know how they've managed to create a community of rigorous, well-intentioned people having high-quality debates to drive high-quality consensus for high-quality content for so long. For so long. They are an incredible example of good governance, good community nurturing, good tooling. Wow, I've always been in awe of and a fan of Wikipedia. And this is another early sign of the coming enshittification of the web powered by AI slop that we all knew was coming. We've all talked about for many months now. And yeah, I'm unsurprised that Wikipedia, along with all the other social peer-to-peer UGC platforms, they're gonna really, really struggle.
To coin a term, this is counter-enshittification, right? Like both of these stories, Cloudflare and Wikipedia are saying they're putting up the defenses. This is the humans fight back, saying, okay, we know there's this asymmetry where AI can just drown us in content. It can learn from us. It can take our stuff, and then it will just vomit back at us 1,000 times as much content. AI depends on us, but it doesn't nurture us, and we're going to fight back. And it will be really interesting to see how the battle lines on this are drawn over the coming years.
They are dealing with the enshittification, the incoming AI onslaught. This is a story of them having to deal with that. And their first best effort is to try to look for these signals of AI and empower the moderators to delete with one click. But it's sort of like the virus, antivirus battles, or the spam, anti-spam battles that have occurred before, where the antagonists are going to get smarter and better, and the defenses need to get smarter and better, and this is continuous kind of military grade warfare. But here's the difference, is other than disinformation and misinformation campaigns, which are the real problem, the quality of this quote-unquote slop is going to continue to improve to a point where it'll be indistinguishable from high-quality content. And in fact, it may even mitigate the need for a Wikipedia at all, because you can get any personalized answer at any time. Now, there's a catch-22 here, which is like, without a Wikipedia, how will the knowledge be gleaned by the LLMs? And the answer might be that it's the LLMs start to be able to observe everything for themselves, the news, the news feeds, and the world. But my point is that there is a difference between low-quality content that is well-meaning and low-quality or even high-quality content that is deceiving. In the fullness of time, Wikipedia may want to embrace the authorship of high-quality content by LLMs, or even itself turn into some kind of LLM. And so they can't fight the rising tide of AI on that level, while still wanting to fight against misinformation and disinformation, even if it's high quality, being tried and insert into their catalog of content. So it's again, here there's a bit of a subtlety, which is that you can't fight the AI. You can't and may not even want to fight the AI where its uses and applications are positive. But there is an disinformation and misinformation vector to this, which will never be positive. And trying to parse out those two is going to be difficult.
And I do think it's also important, and I'm not even putting a moral spin on this, even a practical spin. I imagine that a lot of modern LLMs, a lot of what makes them brilliant is the fact that they were able to train on Wikipedia, right? That
Absolutely.
there were these vast reserves of human knowledge for them to just scoop up and learn from. And the same with all the different publishers on the internet. They've been able to scoop that up and learn from it. And so if they undermine the business model of publishers, and Wikipedia is a nonprofit, but it can still be undermined, right? If people no longer go to Wikipedia, if Wikipedia is drowning in slop and it basically gets smothered by AI, how's the next quantum leap in human knowledge going to happen? Are the AI tools potentially eating their own tails, right? Are they kind of biting the hand that feeds them? And like I said, there's a moral argument to that. I'm not even making that. I'm making a practical argument in that if there is no longer a structural incentive for fresh knowledge to be generated by humans, do we end up in a world where AI runs out of useful training material that allows it to continue to get better over time?
This is an observation and a concern that we've made on this show, and that I've heard other commentators make, of course, that this idea of the snake eating its own tail, right? Where if most content on the internet is AI, and AI just keeps crawling AI, and like, do these things actually get smarter, and we just end up with a circle jerk of garbage? Just as I've been talking today, it's occurred to me that there may be, depending on the velocity of things and depending on the rate of change of these things, we may avoid that for many reasons. But one of them, and this is a little bit more of a science fiction reason, is maybe the AIs start to observe their own news and their own facts. So this is, again, this may not happen fast enough, and this may be a bit of science fiction. I mean, we may not want this, but you might imagine a world where they initially start to observe the news feeds, the CNN, and update their own Wikipedia entries or world knowledge. And then over time, they may observe their own Ring cameras and, whatever, and just like, telemetry that is being fired off from sensors, and be able to actually articulate their own storytelling and be able to update their own world model for themselves. Sounds a bit science fiction. It sounds maybe even a bit scary, but this may be one of the ways that AI ends up avoiding this idea of eating its own tail and sort of consuming its own slop. But yeah, I do think the more short-term and more likely answer is there is a kind of an industrial strength war going on between the slop makers and the AI crawlers, and one that a world we don't want to live in.
And only Matthew Prince and Jimmy Wales can save us, Chris.
All right, those are our thoughts about the battle between the AI companies and the legacy or the web-first companies, Cloudflare and Wikipedia. What do you guys think? Do you guys think that these cloud companies are being scrappy and disruptive and doing what they can to survive and just do their best? Or do you think the legacy web needs to be protected and it's a fight to the death? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below.
All the best .coms are taken or crazily overpriced, so you settle on a workaround domain for your website. Don't compromise. Get a clean, sharp .tech domain that instantly says, "This is a tech startup." Grab yours at get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast, or via domain registrars like GoDaddy.
Speaking of Jimmy, I met Jimmy Wales a couple of times. He used to hang out in the community and in the crew a little bit. In House of Shields especially, he used to love that place in Soma near Market Street. But I think the place shut down. Actually, it was sort of an end of an era. COVID killed everything. But yeah, super nice guy. Very nice, very humble.
Yeah, and he has changed the course of human history. You did say, Chris, it's kind of amazing that Wikipedia managed to build this sort of culture of producing high quality content using an open model for such a long time. And I agree. And as you said that, I wondered how path dependent is that? Like, if you played this world 100 times, like sliding doors style, how many times would you end up with a high quality Wikipedia versus not? And I reckon not that many times. I reckon we got lucky. Mm-hmm. And it has actually, I don't underestimate the impact of Wikipedia on the course of human events. So I think it's pretty cool. So thanks, Jimmy.
I agree with you. And I think, again, just as an aside, there's something I'm very philosophical today and maybe going off on all sorts of tangents, but I have a massive headache. I think if you play the world game over and over again, you'll find that the last, 50, 100 years since World War II, not 50 years, but 100 years, we've lived in a very, very lucky time, a very lucky, peaceful time, especially those, in the West and those who have avoided some of the local, regional conflicts that have occurred. And I think we all take it for granted. The people who've gone through real hardship are very, very, very old or dead. And we assume the world will always trend towards stability and good outcomes. And I don't think we can take that for granted anymore. There's those institutions, those structures, those assumptions, those norms, those international laws, to advocate for law. They've all been eroded or destroyed, and we're in a very, very dangerous place. Combine that with the rapid rate of change. Yeah, the world, we're back to the Russian roulette of what happens next. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting times ahead.
And next topic is Amazon losing ground to Google and Microsoft, and even more weirdly, Chris, Oracle in the cloud. And this is an AI story. So all of the big tech players have recently released their Q2 earnings, and it's quite interesting. Amazon's cloud business grew 18% year on year. Google's grew 32%. Microsoft's grew 30%. And it's quite interesting to see that after these earnings results were reported, that Amazon's share price went down quite a lot. Google had a modest pop. Microsoft had quite a big pop. And so this is, of course, as always, Chris, at the moment, a story about AI, right? Because Amazon's overall numbers were really good, but also in cloud, Amazon AWS has been the preeminent player for such a long time. And there is this feeling that they're losing a bit of ground, that Google and Microsoft and Oracle are becoming more competitive. They're growing faster. And part of the reason for that, at least it is speculated, is because Google and Microsoft and Oracle are better positioned for AI than AWS. And so perhaps in the same way that Amazon were the undisputed leader in the cloud era, where it was about moving from on-premise to in the cloud, are they potentially a little bit challenged when the cloud moves from being primarily about compute workloads to being more about artificial intelligence? Is this the end of Amazon's domination of cloud? What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, they've certainly been fairly low key and conservative with their cloud strategy, it feels like to me. Sort of trying to play the Switzerland middleware game, oh, we come Bedrock or whatever their thing is. We'll do all the models. It's all good. Come over here when you're ready. It's surprising to me, actually, because the CEO of Amazon right now is this guy called Andy Jassy, whose claim to fame is that he conceived and co-founded AWS, Amazon Web Services, inside Amazon with Jeff Bezos. And so one would have imagined that he would have had a strong bias towards the cloud business, and upon seeing the ChatGPT moment would have turned his entire attention to making sure that AWS was competitive in that space. And, maybe he did that a little bit, I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be, hitting pay dirt for them as much as the other two major cloud providers. So yeah, we talk about this a lot, that when the fundamental change occurs in culture, technology, or regulation, the deck gets reshuffled. And, Amazon here can move from first place to second or third place in cloud pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it could even drop off the face of the earth pretty quickly if they don't move with rapidity.
Yeah. I mean, there are a couple of angles to this. I think both of them are interesting, right? So one of them is that Amazon are not a tier one player in AI itself, whereas Google has its Gemini models, is undoubtedly a tier one player. Microsoft has its weird but close relationship with OpenAI, and in that sense, they're very much a tier one player. And Amazon, they kind of have their own model, and they have a shareholding. They own a piece of Anthropic, but they are not at the frontier themselves. And so it's a question of how much it translates, but at least there's a halo effect when you think, oh, where am I going to host my AI workloads? And you start to think, well, maybe Google or Microsoft are a better place for me than Amazon because they have more of the AI sheen around them. And it makes you think maybe their cloud services for AI are more suitable for me than Amazon's, just at a first glance. In my own startup, I kind of feel that way. I'm like, oh, I just don't associate Amazon with AI. So when I think about where am I going to host my AI workloads, Amazon is not the first thing that comes to mind. Whereas a startup founder 5 years ago or even 2 years ago, when they were thinking, where do I host my app? Amazon, AWS would absolutely be the first place to think of. That's one thing. And then the other one is Oracle, which is this weird sleeper, right? Oracle, a massive enterprise database business, very kind of sleepy. No one in sort of startups really cared about them, but they were making huge amounts of cash. And they've been in the data center business for quite a while, and that sort of became a cloud business, but mostly for enterprise. But again, when AI happened, they kind of went all in on being the AI cloud. And it seems like it wasn't just branding. They kind of, every decision they made was like, how do we optimize our cloud service for AI? And not just for big enterprises, but for everyone. And they have been growing like crazy. And out of all those four companies we mentioned, Oracle's stock price is the one that is up the most over the last 6 months. And so sure, Oracle don't have the frontier AI, but I wonder if Amazon are kind of being pincered from both sides. Where on the one hand, you've got Google and Microsoft, who are in a sense premium from the point of view of the models and the AI tooling itself. And then you've got Oracle, who have less of the legacy installed base of being the big gorilla in the room, who are maybe in this new paradigm shift, actually able to be more agile and pivot their business more quickly. And so Amazon are kind of stuck in the middle of these two and don't have a clear point of differentiation. So it's a really interesting place for them to be.
Yeah, it might also speak to this idea of a peacetime CEO versus a wartime CEO or leader. Andy had the benefit of living inside Amazon, building AWS as with first mover advantage and having the wind at his back, and sort of didn't have to worry too much about competitors perhaps in his career. Whereas, now is a highly competitive, disruptive time where he needs to be far more aggressive and far more founder mode than he's comfortable being. I asked ChatGPT here because I don't know Andy very well. I don't know anything about him actually. Whether he would be considered an aggressive leader based on what's known about him, and says that he has sharp execution and clarity, culture-rooted principle, focus on innovation and long horizons. But he's perceived to have rigidity and has purposeful Darwinism culture where he pushes people till they break and potentially overemphasizes discipline. So, he's more of a peacetime leader, and what Amazon needs is a founder mode kind of guy.
Yeah.
And one might argue also that Tim Cook might be in the same.
About to mention Tim Cook as you were talking.
In the same category. Yeah.
I would say he's the Tim Cook of Amazon.
He's the Tim Cook of Amazon, and these guys are very, very good disciplined operators, but maybe they need someone different in times of war. And so that might be something to take away from this as well.
From a scale and complexity point of view, Apple's manufacturing machine and Amazon's data center machine are probably two of the most complex organizational and real-world feats ever accomplished by mankind. And that was Tim Cook's doing at Apple, and it was Andy Jassy's doing at Amazon from the beginning, even while Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos were on the scene. But now things are changing. There's actually a third move in this pincer I think I should mention in the context of startups, which is you look at these next generation cloud hosting tools, your Vercel, your Replit, your Cloudflare workers, to mention them again. And it's like Amazon also feels a bit old fashioned with its kind of, EC2 and sort of more heavyweight cloud hosting models. So yeah, I really think the sheen has come off. As a startup founder, they're not front of mind the way they used to be. And yeah, is Andy Jassy able to move quickly enough to counter that? It's not feeling that way, I must admit.
It also feels like a failure of product leadership, because you're right, they are sort of designed in a fairly legacy way, but they're also designed as this, at least from my point of view, as someone who doesn't deal with these things all the time, as like a giant, hodgepodge of acronyms and, different technologies and services, and they're all just sort of like, there doesn't seem to be an organizing principle for any of it. And a lot of it is, closer to the bare metal than many founders want. They want APIs, right? And they want it all to be elastic and simple to use. And so I know AWS has some of that, but it's just, there's a mix of it and it's all sort of everywhere. And like, how does it all fit together? Who knows? At least, again, I'm not close to it as an engineer. Maybe engineers that deal with it every day are very familiar with it. But I do think there was a period there where AWS would just launch more and more and more and more stuff, just lots of stuff, and how it all fit together and the differentiation between that stuff was never super clear to me. And so yeah, that may be coming to bite them in the butt too. Legacy, messy stuff.
Exactly. So folks, what do you think? Let us know in the comments if you have seen the sheen come off AWS. Are you looking at other hosting providers? And if so, why? All right, Chris. Well, that was a fun one as always. If people want to follow you online, learn more about what you do, and potentially work with you, how can they find you?
You can learn more about me at chrissard.com/advisory. Otherwise, follow me on LinkedIn. Let me know you're from the show. I like what Yanev does there. I'm going to steal it. And I'd love to chat to you there. How about you, Yanev?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn trying to make it a less boring place. And yes, I'll steal back from the thing you stole from me and say, I love getting connection requests from TSP listeners. So please let me know you're from the podcast and I will accept your request. I am also now co-founder of a company called Violet, and we are raising our pre-seed round. We've already gotten our first angel commit from the podcast. So I'm going to do this again, Chris. If you are interested in learning more and potentially investing in my new venture in our pre-seed round, DM me and we can talk.
All right, that's the pod. Catch you later.
See you, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by .tech domains. Naming your startup should be easy, but it isn't, because all the good .com names are taken or wildly overpriced. No more. You don't have to compromise. Your domain shows your focus and intent, so make it sharp, clean, and unmistakably tech with a .tech domain. How do you do that? Head to www.get.tech/TSP or a registrar like GoDaddy and grab your .tech domain today. Get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast so they know you came from us.